Hello humans, welcome back to another video. Now this one is going to be one of my collabs, and I'm bringing a very familiar face to the channel. If you guys were watching any of our waifu or husbando tier lists from the Three Houses days, you remember Blue. How's it going, Blue?
I'm ready to trash talk this game. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
Like always.
So we're not doing a tier list, we're talking about the characters this time around and the story. But Blue wasn't very happy with the story at all and was constantly talking about her grievances. And so I was like, all right, let's just do a video about characters and story. So this is post-editing link. I just wanted to make two quick comments. One, obviously spoilers, because this is a story and character discussion, so we're not holding anything back. So if you don't want to get spoiled, don't watch this video. And two, all of the footage in this discussion is from Leaf's paralogue. So it's not really a spoiler chapter for story purposes, but it is a paralogue spoiler. And for all intents and purposes, this is basically a podcast for the hour long or whatever it is time. So if you guys just want to listen in the background, you can do that. Anyways, enjoy. I'm going to let Blue start this video off. I want to talk about Alir as the character to start with, and we'll let you go ahead and give your opinions on it, Blue.
On Alir specifically, or just...
Yeah, I want to talk about Alir as a main character and sort of how he compares to the rest of the main characters in the Fire Emblem series as a whole.
I mean, to be honest, when it comes to, I guess, character-wise with Alir, I'm gonna, I guess, start with how this ties into the story a bit. How I personally think that this story is a very watered-down version of Awakening, and so you kind of get a lot of those similarities to Robin, I would say, when it comes to Alir. But the thing about Alir is that, and I'll go into this a little bit more in later parts of the video, but there's not really good pacing with Alir's character overall. And I think also because of just how badly paced the story is, you get a lot of scenes where they have these really big emotional moments that don't really deserve to be there without the proper backing. And so I think that kind of messes with Alir's character a lot. And this is an issue overall with other characters as well, where you just kind of have this massive emotional dump out of nowhere with no particular reason as to why it's happening other than, oh, it just kind of has to happen because characters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be stringing together a bunch of different points from like various different aspects of the story for Engage. But I agree, Alir does feel a little bit like Robin, except we don't really have the Crom element here either. And so it's kind of just like, I feel like as a main character in the Fire Emblem series, usually you have some kind of flow, some kind of like clear development path. And Alir does have that. He has this sort of tug of war between him wanting to be a divine dragon and no longer wanting to be a fell dragon, while also sort of discovering his origins, trying to figure out who he is, regain his memory somewhat, even though I don't really remember there's much of that. Like, they don't really focus on the amnesia too much with Alir.
Not really.
Now that I think about it.
Because, I mean, they do go back in time sort of at that one point to see what Alir used to be like, but they never really remember themselves, if I recall correctly. But that was kind of another issue I had, where especially when we're talking about evil Alir, what exactly was the reason as to why they wanted to become good? Because, I mean, you had that conversation with Lumera during that, well, it's not flashback scene, but the time travel sequence. Like, what drove them to be that way, where they say, oh, I want to be a good dragon, other than just because we have to have a main character?
Yeah, that is also an issue, and it's also like, why is Vale also like that as well? I can't remember if we have an issue, like an explanation for that one as well, but it seemed like there was just a couple of them that changed sides in a way.
I mean, Vale's case was a little bit different because I think from the beginning she always was considered the quote-unquote defect, so maybe she was that way to begin with, but they don't really explain why Alir is this way or what made them change their mind to want to become, I guess, a good person, per se.
Yeah, I didn't really think about it that way.
Yeah, like there's no build-up to it when we see it back then, and I mean, we don't really have enough of a background on Alir previous to that point for us to really say, yeah, this is the point where they decided that they wanted to change.
Mm-hmm. Also, how many times did you get annoyed by someone popping up every chapter and going, "The Divine Dragon," whenever Alir shows up?
I mean, it's kind of to be expected, but at the same time, this kind of comes down to character overall. Like, I feel like everyone just, in a way, kind of has the same issues as one another, where you kind of have that gimmick for one, and something I think that could have been very interesting, especially coming from the fact that, oh my gosh, these characters are freaking out that they're going to speak to the Divine Dragon. I wish that they had taken a little bit more of a serious angle with that in some characters. Like, for instance, like Pandreo, I think, if I remember correctly, like, it seemed that they were going to go in a direction where, like, this was a huge deal for him to meet with Alir for the first time. But then, I mean, once you get to their support chain, it's just like, hey, let's go to a party or whatever it was. You know, like, it just seems like a mood whiplash in a way, and it doesn't really go anywhere.
Well, we'll segue into the characters in a second. I want to stick on Alir for just another minute, but I agree. Like, a lot of the in-story and then support conversations do not really clash very well, except for a couple of characters. But the one other point that I want to ask you about Alir and sort of pick your brain on is, I mean, we look at sort of the last 4 characters in general, the avatar characters. Now, I know Alir is more in line with Byleth, where he's not like a customizable avatar that you can change around. They didn't go the Fates and Awakening route here, and they actually gave Alir voice acting, and he's more sort of a traditional lord than what Byleth was. But to me, like, even compared to Robin, to Corrin, even to Byleth, Alir feels a lot more forgettable to me, and I can't really place my finger as to why. He just feels like the end of the story is different, but throughout most of the story I was like, this guy doesn't feel like a lord, he just feels like another character.
So this, I don't, yeah, like, this kind of ties into, I guess, my biggest issue with the story overall, in that the game doesn't have its own identity. It just takes a lot from previous Fire Emblems and then just kind of mashes them all together and expects to get a Fire Emblem story. I mean, really imagine, you know, ask somebody who's at least vaguely familiar with Fire Emblem and say, please describe a basic Fire Emblem story plot to me, and this is kind of what you're gonna get, ultimately. And so that's probably why you have a character like Alir where there's nothing particularly special about them, because they're kind of just a weird mishmash between other characters. Like I said, it's just basically super watered down Robin without the build-up and without any sort of proper payoff, because they do have the payoff, but again, there's no build-up to it, so why should I care about this character?
And I don't think there's absolutely no payoff. I think there is, you know, a little bit of a build-up and a payoff, and it might not be as strong as we would have wanted, but like at the end, it did I looked at it and I was like, oh, okay, so you know, they did try.
I really don't think they did, to be honest. I mean, I feel like there's just this very prevalent issue throughout the entire story of, we have something that we're working with here, like, say for instance, you know, I'm going to go down to my list of scenes that I feel are undeserved in this game, okay, and really think about what makes them so undeserved. Like, let's take, for instance, whenever we meet Lumira very early on into the story, and you kind of get, again, this is kind of where we take concepts from other games. Like, she's kind of like Makoto in a sense, right? Where you have her meeting up with Corrin for the first time and saying, yeah, I'm your mom. And the thing is that Corrin obviously doesn't remember her because, you know, it's been several years, but, you know, they're trying to kind of build up that relationship again. But again, I still feel like even in Fates, we're in chapter 6 or whatever, and like that's when, or no, it was chapter 5 or 6, whichever one it was, where Makoto ends up dying. And I mean, at that point, I kind of just think to myself, well, we didn't really get to know this character very well. And it's even worse for somebody like Lumira, because you meet her in chapter 1 and she dies in chapter 3, right? So, I mean, you didn't really get a proper build up here. And yet, for some reason, you have Alir just completely losing it and having this really melodramatic moment. I mean, this doesn't feel deserved in any sense, because, again, Alir doesn't really know her because they just woke up. I mean, why should you care that this person is dying, right? And it's the same issue with Morian a couple chapters later. I mean, you meet him in chapter 8, and then he dies 2 chapters later. So, I mean, why should we care about his death? I mean, it makes sense that his 2 sons, like Diamant and Alchrist, are upset, but the problem is that it didn't really give us time to understand the bond that they had with him initially. And so when you have the fight against him when he's resurrected as a corrupted, again, you don't feel anything because, again, you didn't get to know this guy outside of maybe that one chapter, and then it's like, oh, well, he was captured and taken away. So again, like, why should I care when I didn't actually meet this character proper? And again, this bleeds into even more character moments, like, for instance, you know, like the Marnie character, well, it's not even just her death, but the fact that she just lore dumps her backstory completely about her mom abandoning her, and it was just so, like, out of nowhere that they do this, and it feels so very casually described. Like, this is kind of a huge deal. You're telling us that this is why you joined the Hounds in the first place. There's no emotional weight to it. There's no particular reason why you started talking about this in the first place, and yet there it is, just thrown at you for no reason. Again, similar to, or going on to say, like, the Grease and Zephyr deaths, where, first of all, it's comically long cutscene where it's like, oh my gosh, will you die already? kind of thing. I know it sounds terrible to say that, but again, it's like they're just talking and talking, like this super melodramatic moment, and I'm like, you're supposed to be dying, right? Like how are you having this really long conversation out of nowhere? And this is also kind of the first time where you start hearing Zephyr saying, like, oh yeah, I wanted to be a mother to the group. I'm like, where is this coming from? And then same goes with Grease, like, where he's saying, yeah, like, I saw you as a mom this whole time. I'm like, where was this? When did you feel this way about this other character, right? Like, why are you saying, yeah, she's like a mom to me? Like, there was no point before this where I would have believed that. You're just telling me in this cutscene that this is how you feel. Right? And this is just kind of a very prevalent thing that continues on throughout the entire story, even up until the end with Sombron. I mean, you lore dump his backstory at the very end as well, about him essentially being the last of his kind again. Basically the last chapter, right? And then they kind of expect you to, I don't know, maybe potentially feel sorry for him because he wants to reunite with his friend that was the emblem at Foundations, and it's like, where's the build up to this? Like, this is just constantly a thing that happens throughout the entire story. It's not just one point. Every single emotional scene or scene that should be considered emotional has no build up to it. You get the big lore dumps, and then it just, again, there's no build up to these emotional moments, so why should I care, right?
All right, so I'm gonna jump in here because I actually want to comment on a few of the things you said, because you bring up a lot of really good points with all of these scenes, and I hadn't thought of it like properly until you were talking about it right now. So the first ones are the Lumera and the Morian deaths, and I completely agree with you there. I mean, I'll take it even a step further. We haven't even really bonded with the rest of the cast to even care about their reaction to the deaths of these major characters. Also, Morian's voice acting and his lines are extremely cringe, and so when he goes, I was just like, whatever. We also saw it in the trailer. And even I on Twitter was like, damn, we're speedrunning like parent deaths in Fire Emblem and the game isn't even out. It was just like ridiculous. Like, you can see it in the trailer. But I think one of the things, like with those two, it's not debatable. You know, what my argument is, and I say this so much to make myself feel better about it, as much as I actually do kind of believe it, is that this game feels like it's self-aware, and it feels like it is the 30th anniversary celebration, and there are a lot of different facets to toss. Like you said, it feels like it's a combination of all the other Fire Emblem games, because it is, for the most part, right? They want to bring together a bunch of stuff that they feel like is relevant, and they want to put it all in one game. And so I think one of the things that we joke a lot about in Fire Emblem is parent deaths, right? Like, all the parents are going to die. And so in this game, they didn't kill off just one parent, they killed off two. They killed off Lumera, and they killed off Morian. Well, I guess Hyacinth dies as well, but like, he's the bad dad in this game. But you do see his daughters still grieve. when he does die.
They do, but again, it's kind of that same issue that we had before, like with Morian, where we don't really know these characters well enough to understand what their relationship was previously to these characters. Like, honestly, Hyacinth feels like Garen 2.0, because it's kind of the same thing where his kids are talking about how great their dad used to be, or at least Xander was, because he knew what his dad used to be like back then. And I mean, you have an entire game to really feel that, Xander is kind of in denial about him, but here it's just kind of dumped on you and then never mentioned again.
Yeah, I mean, in defense of Hyacinth, I think there's like a couple pretty good Ivy and Hortensia conversations around that. So, and I also do think Ivy and Hortensia in general are Hortensia is pretty offensive just because of who she is as a character, but they are some of the few that have some actual redeeming qualities about them. But I want to also touch on the whole Marnie backstory, because I think the Four Hounds are interesting, and I think they deserve their own segment in this video. And so I'm going to move into that a little bit. The Marnie situation was definitely handled wrong, in my opinion. I don't think all of her backstory should have been thrown at you all at once, because Marnie is a character that you see like 4 or 5 times on the maps in the story. Like, how many times do we fight this character? So many times. She could easily develop bit by bit over the course of those 4 or 5 chapters, like every time we see her. I think Mavier does develop slightly, like gradually over time. He's one of the few characters in the game where you do see that he's like contemplating, he's not completely evil. At one point he says, "Give me the emblem of Marth," or whatever it is, like, I want to hold on to it. I'm like, okay, that doesn't really work because it's the last one we get anyways. Cause I expected him to give it to us early. He ends up just tossing us Leafs, I think, at the end, which is like, whatever. Or was it Sigurds? I think he tosses us Sigurds. And
no, wasn't that Vale?
Oh yeah, it was Vale, that's right. Yeah, but then Mavier doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
But like, to his credit, at least he's one of the few characters that develops, I don't want to say gradually, I want to say stepwise. Step by step, there are a couple of things that he does that show you that this character is moving, over time, as opposed to the lore dump that you referenced with Marnie. I think Marnie should have had the same level. Like, oh, I'm a misunderstood child who was abandoned by my mother. I'm an orphan, and so I ended up having to turn to this mother character, which, by the way, now that you brought it up twice with Marnie and Gris, I was like, this is totally also a Mommy Zephyia reference that Intelligent Systems is doing. Like, there's no way they didn't do this on purpose. The whole motherly character with big boobs and like curves, or whatever, dragon who's like sultry and attractive, and then she has the whole theme of she wants to be a mother, and 2 characters see her as a mom. Like, come on, they know what they're doing here. This is definitely also tongue-in-cheek. They're making fun of us as players, which is why I say this game is trying to be self-aware.
See, that's kind of the problem, because, again, going back to what I was saying, this wasn't really built up that she wanted to be a mom. They just dropped it on us at that point where she's dying. So, I mean, you don't have the build-up for that at all. So,
yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I like I was saying, with Marnie, there needed to be a build-up. With Mavier, there was a little bit of it. With Zephyia, she just feels like, oh, she did also have this whole depth about, like, yeah, she wanted to be a mother and she wanted Sombron to be the dad. And, like, I didn't really get that she was in love with him, though. It felt like more of sort of just a mechanical sort of tie.
Yeah, I don't think she was. I think she just, again, in this case, wanted to be a mom. So it doesn't matter who the dad was.
Yeah, well, case. I mean, she said very clearly in the past that she wanted, like, that whole past chapter, that she wanted it to be Sombron. Like, she chose him.
Which, again, also that doesn't get any built up either.
Yeah, it was just kind of out of nowhere. I'm like, what the heck? Wait, why? It would have been much better if she actually fell in love with a human and they had a hybrid kid and that was Alear. Like, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, like, there really is no significance, I would say, for Alear being the kid of Sombron, other than, oh my gosh, what a twist, guys. It's not like we haven't seen this before. It would have been
more interesting if Alear was the kid of Zephyia. That I would have liked more. I think that would have been a little bit more of a twist. You can hide it a bit better. And Zephyia is a fell dragon, I think, as well, but she has no transformative powers, which I also found kind of odd. So, yeah, and then there's Gris, and Gris feels just like they wanted to put an edgelord in the game. And, you know, to their credit, they did. He was very consistent about the whole pain thing and wanting to be like over the top villainous. But yeah, I was talking about Grease, and is it really said Grease?
Well, I mean, isn't that how you pronounce it?
I don't know. I say Gris. Grease seems weird. It's like this greasy person.
I don't know.
But yeah, anyways, I felt like he was just an edgelord character that was into pain, and then at the very end, he's like, oh yeah, family aspect and whatever. So I don't know. What did you think in general about the Four Hounds development?
I really feel like, again, it's the same issue that we see with everyone else in this game. Just, there's no build up to anything proper, and they just lord up stuff on us. That's really all it is.
But do you agree that it should have been more sort of gradual, like Mauvier was done at least?
I don't even think Mauvier really grew per se. I think his entire story was more of, he had, I guess, a goal in mind that never changed, which was to protect Vale, obviously. Mm-hmm. And he was just trying to find a point to be able to, I guess, get out, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. The Four Hounds aren't anything special. When I saw initially that they were doing Four Hounds, I was like, oh, these might be like the Four Fangs from Fire Emblem 7, but I don't think they really live up to that much either.
Again, it's the same thing where they're just kind of throwing together a bunch of ideas from other Fire Emblems and then just kind of expecting them to become some kind of cohesive whole, but they really don't. I mean, it's not even just that. I mean, I talked about how it's very similar to Awakening's thing, where so you have the amnesiac protagonist, they're the kid of a bad guy, mom took the kid away at some point and they don't remember anything about that past life, and then protagonist has to fight some sort of evil version of themselves, and then there's some bits of time travel here and there. There's also that weird, I guess, section of revelation that they throw into this, where, you know, like, the protagonist doesn't remember their mom in this case, and, you know, you have the whole like resurrecting dead people to fight the party, and then you have to fight the mom as a boss after she's resurrected. Again, like, a lot of this kind of mishmash stuff. I mean, you could also argue that the ring proposal gimmick thing was sort of taken from Three Houses. So again, they just kind of threw things together and expected it to work.
Yeah, I agree. One thing that I was actually, it just came to my mind, I don't really have this written down as a point when we're talking about mothers, but I was actually really disappointed in the queens of Solm and Firene, because they kind of show up for, they show up for like one chapter each, and then they don't really show up again, whereas Morian and Hyacinth, as the kings of their respective countries, got like a lot more screen time.
I don't think Morian did. Morian really didn't, honestly. You get like,
you don't think so?
Maybe one chapter,
he at least
and
had
then
the whole.
Yeah.
He had the whole, like, plot around him being corrupted and, like, his kids wanting to save him and blah, blah, blah. But, like, the queens didn't have any relevance whatsoever. I mean, Ev was just kind of there as, like, a damsel in distress. And then Solm's queen was just kind of there as, like, oh, yeah, my kids are just off doing whatever they want to do. And she's not, like, I would have loved for those two to be, like, playable characters, you know? Solm's queen could have been, like, she reminds me of what Ismare could have been in Sacred Stones, or Ismare was in Sacred Stones, because she was a lot more relevant, and she's a playable character in the post-game. And so, like, I feel like Solm's queen could have played a similar role. Ev seemed more like sort of the traditional queen that is just there, which is also odd because they call it the Kingdom of Firene, but it has a queen, so I don't know why it's called that, but it is what it is. But I don't know, I just wanted them to have more of an impact on the story.
The problem is, if you added more playable characters, they're gonna just fall into the same trap as the rest of the cast, where, again, you just kind of have all those gimmicks, and you're just going to get a lot of the samey type of support conversations that don't really go anywhere. And I mean, do you want that for more characters? I mean, I think we had too many characters, and none of them really had any proper relevance or any reason to be there other than, you know, oh, I have some kind of pseudo-association with one character who's here, that's important, maybe, but again, there's really nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, so that, I guess you bring that up, so that just brings us to the elephant in the room, and let's talk about the supporting cast, because a lot of the supporting cast, I mean, this annoys me to no end, and it's the fact that we have, in a Fire Emblem way, sort of drifted from the concept of recruiting enemy units or having there be interesting characters that are integrated into the world that join us for reasons other than they are the retainer of someone, or they are part of a group that joins, or it's really annoying, not just from a story perspective, from a gameplay perspective, for me to have 10 deployment slots, and for a sequence of like 5 chapters, 3 of those slots are taken up by a royal and 2 retainers. And it's annoying because the royals themselves also delve into irrelevancy. Like, they're not good characters. They're not, like, Tamara and Fogado don't even talk much in the story after they join, and it's kind of like, okay, what's the point? These guys are just another character.
Yeah, that's kind of my issue with a lot of the cutscenes once you get to the later parts of the game, where, you know, these characters are just kind of standing there in the background. And I mean, you could take a lot of the lines that they say, because again, they're just really basic lines, and just give them to anybody. There's nothing particularly unique about this character saying it. They honestly don't need to be there, pretty much.
Yeah, I agree. I was very, very disappointed in the role, because, like, I think Celine and Alfred don't really say anything relevant for I think maybe Alfred has like a couple lines near the end of the game, but Celine doesn't say anything, Alchrist doesn't say anything, Hortensia doesn't say anything. It feels like it's always the older royals, like Ivy and Diamant mostly, who are commenting on stuff. Alfred has a couple lines, and I don't even know if Tamara even actually has any lines. Maybe she has like 1 or 2, but it's just kind of like these guys just exist, and the retainers just exist. And like all the retainers and all the characters themselves do have, I'm gonna say, unique personalities, because it's very obvious quirks, and they just play off their quirks and beat that horse to death.
So I just want to say this, and I know that some people are going to get mad about hearing this, but this is kind of what people accused Fates of having. And to be honest, I think people don't give Fates enough credit when it comes to its support conversations. There's actually some really good ones in there. And I think some legitimately interesting character dynamics and relationships that some of those characters have, but you don't get any of that here. I mean, I tried to sit through several support chains, and it's just all the same. Like, there's really nothing particularly interesting that I'm learning about these characters that I'm not, you know, already seeing from just them showing up in the story once or something. And even if it is something new, like, it's not a particularly interesting thing. It's just a gimmick a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. I agree that the supports are pretty bad. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. It's just like Marin is all about being cool, and Rosado is all about being cute. And then so they have their own support conversation where it's like cute versus cool. And I'm like, really? Like, you took the 2 gimmicks and you mashed them against each other. Fantastic. But because of that, I think I was being misled, or I was just being led to believe that all the supports are bad, that eventually I started exploring Ivy's and Diamant's a little bit more, and those are less offensive. They're pretty okay. And Alchrist has some decent supports as well, sort of more exploring his background about how he feels inferior to Diamant, and he's always in his shadow and all that kind of stuff. And Diamant is like a very standard lord. He's always exploring like what it means to be a ruler and how he would be a good king or not and stuff like that. And Ivy in general has like a little bit of sarcasm to her. I feel like the voice acting and the voice direction maybe doesn't do it a lot of justice a lot of the time, but if you read the tonality of her voice properly, just in reading wise, you'll be able to tell that there's a lot of sarcasm in her support. So there are a few that are redeeming. It's not all trash, so to say, but I think you disagree with me on that front.
I want to talk specifically about the Diamant and Alchrist support, because I think it kind of gives an idea of what I'm talking about here when it comes to even the support chains that try, quote unquote. I think they're not really doing what they should be doing. Because if you really look at the relationship between Diamant and Alchrist, I'm going to say this, they're a super watered down version of Ryoma and Takumi. I mean, you have this older brother who's draped out in red, who uses swords. You have the younger brother who has the inferiority complex, that's a bow user. And the thing is that the difference in this case is that with Alchrist and Diamant's support chain, it feels like they're hand-holding. Like, they're holding your hand throughout the entire support chain and telling you, this is how this character feels about this other character, right? I have an inferiority complex, big brother, and it's like, you hear from Diamant, like, oh, you shouldn't feel that way because I'm relatable because I'm not exactly perfect since I'm afraid of magic or whatever, And again, it doesn't feel like, it's really integrated throughout the rest of the story. Because, again, looking back, the Ryoma and Takumi supports, well, it's not even the supports itself, but kind of throughout the game itself and through other supports, especially when you look at Takumi's character, where you have a similar issue where he has the inferiority complex, but it actually bleeds into the main story itself. It's why, he acts the way he does, and you could argue that it's kind of what leads him to, I don't want to say become the final boss of Conquest in a way, but I feel like a lot of his insecurities kind of are built into this big thing that just kind of explodes at the very end. Even if he's dead at that point, I feel like there's a lot of things building up to that. And you could argue that his inferiority complex bleeds into support chains, like for instance with his son, Kiragi, where in their support chain you have this whole thing about Kiragi being really good at being an archer, right? He's able to use his bow properly, and Takumi realizes, oh my gosh, my son, who's, again, like a lot younger than me, is really good at this and arguably better than me. And the thing is that his inferiority complex kind of gets in the way of this, where he starts trying to make himself better than his own son and say, like, oh yeah, you're making this mistake or whatever, when clearly he's not. And again, you see this in other support chains, and honestly, I don't feel that when you look at somebody like Alcris. It just feels very self-contained sometimes, or if it isn't really built upon proper in other support chains, or even in the story itself. It doesn't feel very relevant outside of maybe a few conversations, again, that he has specifically with Diamant. So again, I feel like there's too much self-containedness to this, and it doesn't really go anywhere a lot of the time.
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, the characters do have like very specific tropes that they are following, and that's going to show in their support conversations, and they didn't really explore them much outside of that. Like, where are the days where we had Fire Emblem 7 conversations where you find out like Renault was a mercenary in his past, and he has like dark story implemented and integrated supports. Like, we don't really see that much as much as we used to. Three Houses did a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends. Because there are some support chains where, you didn't really have the greatest ones. Blue Lions, I think, did a really good job of this, where you get to learn a lot more about the characters. But again, sometimes when you look at some of the other houses, you're going to get a lot of gimmick supports. But again, it's kind of a mixed bag there. But I think overall, Three Houses did a much better job with its characters and story.
Absolutely. You and I did a whole video on this, but we had characters like Lawrence and Lysithea and Linhardt and Ferdinand, and like almost every single character in Three Houses had some kind of support conversation that redeemed them in a way, or showed you a side of them that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
And that's kind of the point of supports. Like, that's the whole point. You're supposed to get to know these characters proper and actually feel something for them. I felt nothing for any of these characters by the end of the game, especially, when I go into a Fire Emblem game and say, like, hey, I'm gonna have my character here as support someone. At the very end, I watched every single male as support to decide who I wanted to pair off with my Alir, and none of them stood out to me. And I felt nothing when I finally did choose one. Like, it didn't feel unique. I didn't feel, like this was what I was building up to. Like, this is what I wanted in the end. Again, like, there's just nothing.
Yeah, even for me, I was torn between sort of Marin and Ivy at the end, and I ended up going with Ivy just because, reasons.
Reasons.
But yeah, there wasn't anything pulling me towards any character specifically like I had that with Shamir, for example, who had a lot of like good qualities and redeeming factors, and like there was depth, and there was, I think my issue with Engage at the end of the day boils down to every character is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they are just that one thing, and there's not much else left and right to deviate to. And I have a cat meowing in the background, if you can hear.
A little. She's here to give her opinions.
Yeah, she's not happy about the story either.
Honestly,
But
like, here's the thing though, because the times where the characters do try to deviate, it's usually for shock value, I think. Like, for instance, you know, like the Vander's supposed to be the type of character who's like, he's the strong, you know, guard of our main character, and he's supposed to be somewhat serious, right? But then you have the conversation with Pendra where he's like, oh, I'm gonna like boogie or whatever, I'm gonna dance, and it's like really stupid, right? I mean, you have really dumb things like, say for instance, like Etia's support where she's like, oh my gosh, the potato thief or whatever, you know, like just really dumb things like people wouldn't really say in real life, and it's just kind of there for like random equals funny kind of thing, you know, or again, like I said, shock value, because oh my gosh, this character shouldn't be saying this because this is their personality. Again, it just feels like it's thrown in because they don't really know what to do. And honestly, I think it's some of the worst we've had, to be honest. I mean, there were some bad ones in Echoes. I mean, there's going to be people who say, like, no, Echoes had really good characters. It didn't. I'm not going to really go too into it, but, I mean, I feel like if we're going to compare support conversations here, Engage is basically if you took the support chain from Echoes, specifically the one between Cliff and Tobin, and it's every single support conversation in Engage. This conversation that basically goes nowhere, essentially.
yeah, that is a very good way of summarizing it. I think they are conversations that go nowhere.
And honestly, this game really goes nowhere overall. That's just...
I mean, we go somewhere. So that's actually one of my gripes about this game. And I have this written down as sort of like the geographical circularness of the story. And it really pissed me off because we start in the church, whatever it is, I forget what it's called, area where Lumera and Alir wake up. And then we go to Farinay. And then from there on, we are literally going in a circle. We go from Farinay to Brodia to Elugia to Solm, back to Farinay, and then we take a boat to Elugia. So that's the only time it deviates around, away from like doing the whole loop. But we go literally in a circle around the map, and then we go to Elugia, and then we just go back straight to like the is it Gradlon? Is that what it's called?
Wasn't that the, I guess, the evil area?
Yeah, like the center area. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. It's like we go around in a loop, and then we go up to Elugia, and then we go back to the center area, and that's it. And that really annoys me because, I mean, you could kind of tell that it was in a circle before when we saw the map and we saw the trailers, but I didn't think they would this literally just use, like, going around it like a clock. And it bothers me because before, I mean, let's be real, Fire Emblem doesn't really have any, like, super insane maps or anything, but at least before there was a little bit of creativity in how you moved across the world you were in, and there was a nice way of visualizing it. Like even in the Tellius games where it was just a map and they had like a blue circle on it, and then they had the character sort of walk from spot to spot, you never walked in a circle. It was always you would go to a certain area, you would have a couple chapters there, then you would either return to your hub or it would take you to a different area. And it wasn't just like so predictable as in you're going to go from A to B to C to D and then back to A to C to F and then just stay, you know, it was really weird. I don't know if you have any opinion on that, but that was just something that bothered me with the story.
Yeah, I think the issue here is specifically that maybe the story was written before the map existed. And so it was just kind of convenient for them to walk from one place to another. It's like, well, we have to go to this place, but then we have to go to this place next, so might as well just have it going in that straight line or in the circle, right? It just feels as though, yeah, like the map just doesn't really, like, again, the map just feels like it was added post writing the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, even if it was added post writing the story, at least you could have been created with the geographical display of the map, like, you know, you could change it around to make it less circular. So I don't know if that's like a good excuse for them. But another reason it bothers me is because of the whole gameplay mechanic where you need to invest in your regions. Like, what's the point of investing in this region if I can only invest in it once I'm done with a chapter? And then I only have like 1 or 2 chapters afterwards to reap the rewards.
Yeah, just what do you even really get out of it? per se. I mean,
skirmishes. It allows you to grind skirmishes for upgrades. That's pretty much what it is.
I know,
but like, I agree with you.
But again, there's really no, I guess, narrative purpose is the best way to put it. Like, gameplay-wise, sure, you could argue, but narrative-wise, you don't get anything out of it.
Yeah, which is a little bit of a disappointment. It would have been interesting if it, like, had maybe a unique character unlocked to, like, the level 4 of each one, and so that felt like your resource management was made use of in a way where this game is already very stingy with giving you cash, but you can feel like, oh, you know, if I invest in a region, I'll get something properly back. There are the S rank weapons at level 5, but who is getting level 5 in a first playthrough unless you're seriously grinding? I highly doubt anyone is. All right, let's talk about Sombron.
I mean, I already kind of gave my opinion on just how, I mean, this is kind of a really basic evil dragon villain character who, again, has the same issue as every other character in this game, especially, you know, the ones that have cutscene relevance, where what's the point if you're just gonna dump their entire backstory in a single cutscene and not build up to this? Why should I care?
Yeah, he's very comically evil dragon, all the way until the very, very last chapter where you're closing with the fact that this dude is an alien. He's from outer space and he came with a ring. And then he showed up to a land with a bunch of other dragons. The man started reproducing both offspring and rings somehow. We started cranking those out. And then it became sort of he wants to devour this world and go to other universes and take revenge on the people who eradicated his race or something like that. So it was interesting. I'll say that. I expected him to just be another Medius, like, oh, I'm just an evil dragon who just exists for the sake of being evil. At least he has a little bit more than that. I will give it credit for that.
I will not give it credit for that because, again, it feels like it's just thrown in last minute. Like, they didn't even care. If anything, I feel like it makes it worse.
Honestly, it felt like I was watching an Avengers movie. It's like, we're gonna use the power of all the rings, which are the Avengers, to take down, you know, Thanos, which is Sombron, who wants to destroy all the world. Like, not that there's anything wrong with Marvel movies. I do like Marvel movies, but it felt very Avengers-esque in a way. It was like almost comical.
Also, can I just say that this is basically a Dune all over again? This character that basically has essentially zero background whatsoever, and then they just dump everything out at you at the last minute, just show don't tell. And why am I supposed to care when this character's saying that they have this really sad backstory? I don't feel anything for these characters at all. Please stop doing this, IS. If you're not gonna even bother, why even add the dialogue?
Yeah, I don't know. Sombron as a villain had a lot of promise. You know, I complain a lot about villains being evil for the sake of evil, but there's a lot you can do with someone who is just corrupt.
Yes, there is, but the problem is that you need to actually build up the character and make them interesting. We don't get anything like that. That's exactly where I was going with it.
That's exactly where I was going with it, because, like, it gives you a lot of power to say, okay, this character is just evil. That's who he is. But there can be reasons why he's evil. There can be a development as to why he's evil. There can be, not even that, there can at least be a philosophy that is somewhat valid. Like we see, even to this day, we see the Edelgard versus Dimitri debates, right? Where people are just like, Edelgard is the spawn of Satan. But there are a lot of people who look at Edelgard and you can say, at least she had a point. You know, and so like the gray morality of things is a good addition. It's hard to do, but it is still a good addition. And that is something we have completely lost from Sombron. Now, they do try to make you feel sorry for him at the end. It doesn't really work, because at that point, I'm just like, I want to kill him. Just let me kill him and get the game over with.
But yeah,
Sombron as a villain was definitely a disappointment to me.
Again, it's an issue with every character. I'm just going to keep reiterating that. It's not even just him. It's the entire cast that's like this.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like they attempted to create depth to these characters, and it was a little bit too late.
And this is kind of another thing where I kind of wanted to go into the argument that I see way too much when it comes to people, I guess, defending the story, is that it's supposed to be lighthearted. But if it's supposed to be lighthearted, why do they shoehorn these really dramatic or melodramatic scenes that make it seem like we're supposed to care? Right? It's very clear that, again, it's not supposed to be lighthearted. It's just a mess. It's just a bunch of really bad choices when it comes to pacing.
I disagree that it's supposed to be lighthearted. I agree with my opinion that it is completely self-aware and that they did all this on purpose, just to mess with us. That it is the only conceivable. It legit. It's the only conceivable reason. It's the only conceivable thought.
No. You know what?
That you can use to defend it. There's nothing else. There literally is nothing else. You did this on purpose. I see you until you did this on purpose.
I'm telling you, Link, they just put the interns in charge. So while they work on the FE4 remake.
Listen, I'm okay with that. If you are dedicating your entire team to the FE4 remake, by all means do. Which, you know what? This is something that I really appreciated. I think it's extremely underrated in terms of like gameplay and story integration. But the post-battle exploration of the maps, I think would be fantastic for an FE4 remake, because one of the things that is really cool about FE4 is that you move from castle to castle across the map, and being able to have that framework as like, we're going to build a map that you can then walk around and is going to look different each chapter is extremely valuable for the, I don't know how I want to say it, but to help you visualize the world of FE4. Because kind of like Engage, in FE4 you do go around the entire map in maybe a little bit of a circular motion. So,
which again, you could argue sort of makes sense from a logistics standpoint, right? I mean, why would you want to waste your resources going all the way across the map only to come back? I mean...
Yeah, well, I mean, FE4 has war problems, and you're kind of going from area to area, which are at war with each other, and you're exploring the politics of things. So I do somewhat agree with that. And the maps where they do make you backtrack and not go in a straight line, people get really pissed about. So, and that's a little bit of an aside to what I think Engage did well. And I'm going to work on videos for like reviewing the game. They're probably already out by the time this video comes out. But yeah, I don't know. I think the lighthearted thing is people trying to defend the story. It's not lighthearted. Don't defend it that way. Defend it with my narrative, which is that they did this on purpose to mess with the fans. That is a much more interesting take on things.
Honestly, I'm just gonna assume that this was their way of trying to get the Fae fan base into the main games, because, I mean, they're already used to really basic stories as it is. Because let's be real, Faye's story isn't the greatest. I mean, they try sometimes, but, you know, like, it's a lot of the same.
I think I stopped reading after book 2, and I stopped playing entirely after book 4 or something like that.
I kind of just checked out after book 5. Just, there was really no reason to continue. But, yeah, I feel like this game was kind of just meant for fans of the series. I mean, that's why they brought the rings in. There's really no reason for those characters to exist here other than to, again, attract that audience and say, hey, I know that character. But, you know, there's really no reason for them to be here other than just fan service.
Yeah, pretty much. So what do we think? Is Engage the worst story in all of Fire Emblem so far? As a little closing statement, let's see.
I think that Gaiden is really bad, and by extension, Shadows of Valentia, but I mean, people are gonna disagree with me on that, but I think that's a terrible story, but arguably it's not as bad as Engage.
Maybe we should do a tier list and rank all the stories. I think that would be interesting.
Boy, people are not gonna agree with me on things.
No, but no one ever really does agree with you. I mean, I don't. When you and I agree on things, like actually agree on things that are very debate worthy, that means there's a problem with this world. You know, like.
There's a problem with the Fire Emblem fan base settling for less. I think this is an issue with Fire Emblem. Don't attack the fan base.
These are my people. Don't attack the fan base.
I will attack the fan base because I think that they settle for really bad. Like, just, it's when we have something vaguely competent, everybody just freaks out and says, oh my gosh, this is amazing, because we've been deprived of decent storytelling in the series. I'm just gonna say.
I think we have some decent storytelling and some pretty good characters from time to time, but
on occasion.
Let's keep this engage. Let's keep this engage worthy. In terms of a story, I actually think this game is very on par with the Arcania games, with the Marth games. Like I don't think it's much worse or much better than those. I think it's pretty similar level.
It's very basic.
I mean, Fates is another one that's infamous for people saying it has the worst story.
I don't think it does, but I mean, let's look at this from, I guess, a not really collective standpoint, but more of as a whole, where I think that Fates is overall better than Engage when it comes to, again, just a full package, because at the very least there are some good supports. Like I said, in Fates, there's some really interesting support chains in there that I feel really delve deep and have some subtlety to them, arguably, in some cases, and are legitimately interesting, and I want to learn more about some of these characters. But again, in Engage, I don't get that at all. So again, say what you want about the mess that is the Fates story, but at least they got some things right. Whereas I feel like Engage only got the gameplay right. Everything else
the
was just
gameplay
kind of
was very good. That is a conversation that we need to have about gameplay. I mean, not in this video, because this video is about story and characters, but oh my god, the Engage gameplay is so good.
But that's
you need to replay the game.
Just an issue overall where IS has this weird thing where they can make a game with good gameplay but bad story, or a game with really good story and not good gameplay, but never both.
Blue, you have to replay the game on Maddening and just skip the story. It is so much fun.
I have no time to do it.
It won't take long. Like I'm 10 hours in, I think, and I've gotten through over half of Maddening. So
we'll see.
Like just do it is genuinely so fun to play.
You know, at least, you know, when I played through Fates, specifically Conquest or Lunatic Conquest, I at least got to re-listen to or reread all of the support chains that I liked. And I mean, I'm not even going to get that here.
Well, that's the good thing here is you get to skip all the cringe.
But that's the thing. That's why I play Fire Emblem. Well, not even just Fire Emblem. This is why I play most games. I've always been much more of a story and character person. Gameplay always comes second to me. In every other.
I mean, you've also been writing your own stuff.
Yes, I do.
Maybe we should tell people about that.
You can put my my stuff in the
as we close out this video. So, Blue has been writing ASMR scripts on Reddit that also get covered on YouTube. So if you guys are interested in checking that out, I'll leave links in the description to where you can find. Yeah,
there's some very talented people who've done my work. So hopefully you'll check that out if you actually enjoy it. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm the greatest at writing characters, but I think I at least do a decent job at giving people what they want sometimes.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I don't think that's unreasonable. But yeah, anyways, I don't think we have anything left to talk about. I think we have said a lot of bad and some good about the story and the characters.
I've said my piece here. And again, we could do that one tier list with the rest of the games, and people can listen to my very controversial opinions about the stories in the series. I will trash talk Shadows of Valentia to oblivion.
Well, they can let us know in the comments if they're interested in seeing something like that, so... but yeah, I think that's about it. Let us know what you guys thought about the story and the characters in the comments. And thank you, Blue, for joining me.
Always a pleasure.
All right, I'll see you guys in another video, probably Monday. I think this is coming out on a Saturday. If it comes out on Monday, then on a Wednesday. And if it comes out on a Wednesday, then on a Saturday. That's kind of my schedule now. But in the words of the good old cartoons, that's all, folks. I'll see you all in the next video very soon. Peace.
Bye-bye.